Hi folks, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ben and I'm a photographer based in North Wales. This is finally my second episode of my Camera Basics series. In this episode we'll be going over shutter speed, what it is, how it works and how it can affect your images. But first we'll just have a brief recap of the first episode, which was all about light and exposure. So that first episode was a bit rubbish, I have to say. I'll take full responsibility for that. The lighting was awful, cards got corrupted, nothing really went quite to plan, but I just mashed it all together. But very briefly, what we covered was light, how it's measured, i.e. stops, and how we use light to create an image using a camera. We briefly mentioned the exposure triangle, which comprises of shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. These are the three key variables in any photograph that we take, and learning how to use those three variables, we can better understand how an image is made and how we can alter them to improve our images. So if you want to go back and watch that video before this video, I'll leave a link up here as well as down in the description below, and I'll wait. Okay, so now that's fresh in your mind, let's get more to grips with shutter speed. As I mentioned in that first video, shutter speed is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It indicates how long the camera's shutter is open for, and therefore shutter speed determines how much light is able to enter to hit the camera's sensor. It's measured in seconds and more commonly fractions of seconds. In conjunction with aperture and ISO, shutter speed will determine the overall exposure of your image. However, as I also mentioned, all shutter, aperture and ISO all have their own unique effects on an image. In the case of shutter speed, the main variable that we need to think of is motion. The shutter speed that we use for photographing a lovely, nicely lit outdoor landscape scene might be completely useless if we're trying to photograph a rally car or a sportsman, and would probably be next to useless if we were hoping to shoot the Milky Way and the night sky. A slow shutter speed will expose the camera sensor to light for a longer period of time. For example, let's say 10 seconds if we were photographing the stars. In this case, if the subject is moving, then we're capturing the motion of the subject throughout that 10 seconds. If it's a fast moving subject, that means we'll probably come away with blurry images. Using a fast shutter speed, for example 1/2000th of a second, we're giving the sensor a brief glimpse of the subject before the shutter closes again. This means that less motion is captured and we'll more than likely have a very sharp image. A standard shutter speed, such as 1/200th of a second, will probably be in between the two. It likely wouldn't be able to give us a sharp image of a fast moving subject, and it would probably still be too dark, underexposed on the night sky. So let's recap that so far. If we had a fast moving subject, such as a rally car, coming at me about 60-70 mile an hour, I'm going to want a very fast shutter speed so that I can freeze the action, giving the sensor a very brief glimpse of the subject to create a sharp image. If I'm wanting to shoot the night sky, it's very dark, so the shutter needs to be open for a longer time to gather in more light to give us a properly exposed image. And then on a clear day outdoors, a standard shutter speed, probably between 1/100th and 1/500th of a second, will probably do just fine for a landscape scene. Now that we know how shutter speed can affect our images, we can use that to our advantage. On the previous shot of a rally car, I was using a fast shutter speed, which meant that I froze the action, and you can see all the dirt being kicked up by the tyres and everything. I have a really nice sharp image of the car. However, we can experiment. What I tried with this image is panning with the car. So I tried using a slower shutter speed, and I kept my eye to the viewfinder, keeping the car in the same spot while I was taking the image, Using this effect, we still have a very sharp image of the car itself, but all the background and foreground is moving, it's blurred, and this can really help to emphasize the speed that the car is moving. Obviously this happens to everything that's moving in the frame, so you will notice that the car's wheels are also blurred out, again emphasizing the speed. This can take some getting used to, it does take practice, but once you've nailed the technique, you can get some really interesting shots. Another popular use of slow shutter speeds is shooting moving water, such as waterfalls or coastal shots. In this case, you'll usually want to use a tripod because we still want the rest of the frame to be nice and sharp in focus, while the passing water captured over a longer period of time will be blurred through the scene. Using faster shutter speed, you can really draw emphasis to the power of the water, such as a waterfall or a stormy coastal scene. But by using a slower shutter speed, you can really get a lot more creative, experimenting with different shutter speeds to see which best suits the image. There are times where adjusting your aperture and ISO, which we'll get to soon, isn't quite enough to use the shutter speed that you want and still get a properly exposed image. And this is where filters come in. ND, or neutral density filters, are dark pieces of glass which you put in front of your camera's lens. It's a totally overused analogy, but you can imagine ND filters as sunglasses for your camera lens. There's all sorts of different types, but the two main types are screw-on filters, as I'm using right now, and filter systems, where you can attach an adapter to your lens and then slide different filters in front of it. These ND filters are also measured in stops, as is shutter speed, aperture and ISO, which means that you can figure out from the power of the ND filter how much your exposure will change. Some of the most common densities of ND filters include a 6 stop, 10 stop and 16 stop. For example, here I have a 6 stop filter and a 10 stop filter. Obviously the 10 stop filter is darker because it's able to block out that extra 4 stops than 6 stop filter can. Using these filters on the front of your lens means that we can adjust our shutter speed while keeping our ISO and aperture as they were. This means that we can be shooting out in broad daylight and still get a very slow shutter speed. Filters like these are also very commonly used in architecture photography and coastline photography. Now let's not forget that every image that you take depends entirely on the available light you have to play with. Using a fast shutter speed will only allow the camera sensor to get a brief glimpse of your subject and therefore not very much light. If you're in a darker scenario, then you will need to adjust your aperture and ISO to compensate for that. A good example of this is these very flattering photos of myself hurtling down an alpine coaster. In these examples, the photographer is shooting on a Canon 1DX and the Canon 70-200mm f4 lens. On this day in particular, it was an overcast day, so there wasn't very much light to begin with, and then we're also in the middle of a forest, so a lot of that available light is also being cut out by the trees. On the coaster, I'm coming down the hill at roughly 30 miles per hour, and that's both towards the photographer as well as from side to side. In order to get a sharp image of me, the photographer had to use a fast shutter speed, so they were shooting at 1/2500th of a second. To be able to do so, they were also shooting at the lens's widest aperture, which was f4, and they were using an ISO of 5000. On top of that, she was also using our panning technique, so she was following me through her viewfinder as I was moving past her. Luckily, the camera that she was using, the Canon 1DX, has a very capable sensor, so even at those high ISO values, which we'll get to in the next episode, we still come away with a nice clean image, and because of the combination of a fast shutter speed and our panning technique, we still come away with a very sharp image. So very simply, that is how shutter speed affects our images. It's all to do with motion. Just think of it two ways. If you've taken an image and you're not happy with it, if it's to do with the motion of the subject, then it's probably the shutter speed that needs to change. If you want a sharper image of your subject, then you're going to want a faster shutter speed. Or if you want to exaggerate the motion in your image, you'll probably want to use a slower shutter speed. In the next episode, we'll be covering ISO, what it is, how it works, and how it affects your images. So if you enjoyed and learned from this episode, please do be sure to hit describe. Please do consider hitting subscribe down the bottom there, as well as the notification bell. That'll let you know when I release new videos. If you're interested in any of the equipment that I use, I've got it all linked down below. I have a kit list which will show you all of my kit, as well as Amazon affiliate links. So if you're thinking of purchasing an item, do consider using those links. It'll make no difference in cost to you, and I might get a few pennies. Otherwise, if you'd just like to show your appreciation for the video, I also have a PayPal link if you'd like to buy me a coffee to help get these videos out quicker, and giving the video a like is always appreciated. So until next time, get out there with your camera, get shooting, get practicing what you're learning, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode.